Let's now look at how you can configure and install the data import export framework. If you're running AX 2012 R3 or AX 2012 R2 with cumulative update 7, then the data import export framework is already built into the AX setup program. All you need to do is install the components directly from setup, configure it, and you can start leveraging it to import and export framework. If on the other hand, you're using AX 2012 RTM, AX 2012 Feature Pack, or AX 2012 R2 before cumulative update 7, then you must download the data import export framework from information source. There are three components that make up the data import export framework: the client components, the AOS components, and the data import export framework service, which must be installed on the SSIS server. The typical installation process is the following. You first start with installing the SSIS components on the SSIS server. It is recommended that you use the AOS service account when installing the SSIS component of the data import export framework. Next, you must install the AOS component on the AOS server. After that, you install the client component on the client machines. If you're running a version of AX that's earlier than AX 2012 R2 CU7, then you must also install the model data import export framework.model for the version that you are running. Finally, compile and synchronize the application, and then you're ready to start using the data import export framework. One word of caution: if you're using the data import export framework for a version prior to AX 2012 R2 CU7 and you've installed DIXF from information source on that version, then be sure to fully uninstall it and then reinstall it for cumulative update 7. When uninstalling the data import export framework, be sure to remove all the binary files using the add remove programs and uninstall the data import export framework model. Now let's take a look at the parameters that need to be configured for data import export framework to function correctly. We're going to start with navigating to the data import export framework module, which you can do from the ribbon bar, and then data import export framework. Then on the setup, click on the data import export framework parameters. Here we need to set up the shared working directory that is used by the data import export framework. Before we can set this up, we need to create a directory. So let's create this using Windows Explorer. I'm going to create a folder called DIXF working directory. We also need to make it a shared directory so that it's accessible from all the different machines. So let's do that. You can do that by right-clicking on the folder, click on shared with, and then specific people. And here already we have the users we want to give access to, the administrator. So you can just click on share. Now the folder is shared under this UNC path, AX 2012 R2 A DIXF working directory. Let's now set this directory up within the data import export framework. To do that, I'm going to go back to the data import export framework parameters, click on browse, and enter the name of the directory. I've selected the directory, click on Save, and then click on the Validate button. You'll notice that there's now a green checkbox next to Validate, and this shows that the framework is able to access the working directory. Now, there are a few other options that you can specify in the data import-export framework parameters. You'll notice that there's a service connection URL that's specified here. This URL can be used to connect to the data import-export framework service and to execute import and export operations via the service and generally manage the service. You also have a checkbox to ignore errors. Selecting this would mean that any errors that occurred during the source to staging process are ignored. The default is not to ignore errors, and we leave it as is. There's another option to create an error file. And what this does is if there are any error rows, then they're sent to the error files. Let's check this option so we get a file created when there are errors. The next option that you have is the data access mode. This mode specifies gives you a couple of options. One is to use table or view, or the other is to use the fast load option for the table or view. We're going to leave this option as table or view with the fast load option, which enables us to also load double byte character set data. And the last option that you have available here is the maximum insert commit size. What this specifies is the batch size that is used to commit fast load operations. The current default value indicates that all the data is committed in a single batch. We just looked at the steps to configure the data import-export framework. With that, we come to the end of Module 2, and I'll see you in the module review.